brakes to keep this truck still. The odds of it rolling or moving are almost nothing. But I wouldn't want to play the odds when a 30,000-pound vehicle rolls over your head. Of course, a hard head like that, you're not gonna. Alright, after you chop your wheels, you're going to start in the front. When it starts at the top, we have our clearance lights. They're amber in color, they're not cracked or broken, and they're properly working. Okay? If you don't see wires, you don't have to say anything about wires. Okay? Come down to the bottom, just make a appearance of you're looking underneath for puddles, grease, oil, or water. Okay? Turn up to your lights. Okay? I have my running lights. They're amber in color. They're not cracked or broken. They're working properly. They also function as my turn signals and my four-ways. I have my headlights, my high beam and my low beam. They're mounted properly. They're not cracked or broken. They're white in color. Okay? You don't have to do these. They're not DOT required. Okay? Once that's done, make sure it's unlocked. Okay. Should need it.
Mm-hmm. Both sides.
Open your hood. When you do your test, make sure you do it the way Clint showed you to. One hand here and one hand at the top to hold it when it comes back. Okay. Start on the passenger side and start with your hoses. Okay? My hoses are properly mounted and secured at both ends. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and they're not leaking. Okay? Then we'll come down to our turbo, which starts about here and goes to here. Turbo, and then our exhaust goes back here. Turbo and our exhaust are properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. Okay, right behind our exhaust back there is our DEF filter. That's all you got to say. Just point it out. All right. Right here we have our alternator. It's properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked or broken, and it's working properly. It is belt driven. The belt itself is not cut, torn, or frayed, and it has to have no less than 3/4 inch slack mid-span. Okay? When we come out, we have our windshield wiper fluid reservoir. It's properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken, not leaking, and it has fluid in it. Okay? There's no specific manufacturer specs for this, but it has to have fluid in it. Okay? Cap is in place, and it's not leaking. To the driver's side, start right here with your hoses again. My hoses are properly mounted and secured at both ends. There are no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. There's no loose or missing bolts, and it's not leaking, or they are not leaking. Okay. Then we have our coolant reservoir. It's properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking, and it's filled to manufacturer specs. Okay. Got to be at least to the cold minimum. All right. It has two caps. They're not cracked or broken, and they are not leaking. All right. Right here, I have my oil fill cap. The cap is in place. It's not cracked or broken. This is where I put my oil in. Right here is my dipstick. Okay. To check my oil, I'll pull my dipstick out, clean it, put it back in, pull it out, and read it. Okay. Now, go right here against our engine. We have our water pump. It's properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. Okay, my water pump is belt driven. Okay, my belt itself is not cut, torn, or frayed, and it can have no less than 3/4 inch slack mid-span. All right, so you follow that back against your engine. You have your air compressor and what else is back here? Power steering pumps. Okay, they are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken, and they're not leaking. These are gear driven. Okay, you come out right here, try to keep it in a certain pattern. There's no perfect pattern, but pick your pattern. I have my steering column. It's properly mounted and secured at both ends with U-bolts. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. Okay, Follow that down into my gearbox. Okay, my steering gearbox is properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. My power steering backflow hose, it's properly mounted and secured at both ends. Okay, there's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and it's not leaking. My power steering reservoir, okay, it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken, and no loose or missing bolts, and it's not leaking. Both caps are in place, they're not cracked or broken, and they're not leaking, and it's filled to manufacturer spec. Yes, sir. Oh, all right. We have our pitman arm, our drag link, our upper and lower control arm, and our tie rod. They are properly mounted and secured by castle nuts and cotter pins, and they're not cracked, bent, or broken. Okay? Keeping things in a group together, we're going to go to our suspension. We have our spring mount. It's properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts, and it's not cracked or broken. We have our leaf springs. They're properly mounted and secured at both ends. They're not cracked, bent, or broken, and they are properly aligned. There's two of them. Okay, the one at the bottom is a floater. They're held together by our U-joints, U-bolts, and our saddle. They are properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts. Looseness will be indicated by rust trails or shiny metal, and they're not cracked or broken. Connected to my saddle is my shock absorber. It's properly mounted and secured at both ends. No loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked, bent, or broken, and it's not leaking. Okay? Right next to our shock absorber is our air line and our ABS line. Okay? They are properly mounted and secured at both ends. Okay? Then you go in to separate them. Have my air line. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and it's not leaking. And my ABS line, it's not cut, torn, or frayed, and there's no exposed wires. Follow that in, goes into your brake chamber. My brake chamber is properly mounted and secured, no loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. All right, you follow that into your brake system. I have my rotor and my pads, okay? They are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no debris between my rotor and my pad, such as grease or oil, and my pad itself can be no less than 1/4 inch thickness. Okay? From there, you go to your tires. Start on the outside, your ABCs. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. They have air in it, so they're properly inflated to the manufactured specs. Okay? And you got your tread. Tread depth can be no less than 4/32 on your steer tires. Okay? My tires are properly mounted to my wheels. My wheels are not cracked or damaged, and there's no illegal welds. I have my lug nuts. They're all 10 in place. They're mounted and secured. There's no looseness. Looseness will be indicated by shiny metal or rust trails. And I have my hub seal. Okay, it's properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts. Not cracked or damaged, and it's not leaking. Then I have my valve stem. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. There's no loose or missing bolts. It's not leaking, and the cap is in place. Okay? Right here, we have our clearance light. It's properly mounted and secured. It's amber in color. It's not cracked or broken. It's working properly, and it also acts as my four-way and my turn signal. Your mirror. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. There's no loose or missing bolts. Okay? Your door and your door handle. Do these at the same time. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. No loose or missing bolts. Open it, close it. It's functioning properly. You open your door back up all the way, and you got your hinges. You got two of them. They're properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts, and they're not cracked or broken. Okay, you have your door weather seal on your frame and on your door. Okay, it's not cut, torn, or frayed, and it's not leaking. Right back here, here's your battery box. Okay, this is where your batteries are. All you got to say is the battery box is properly mounted and secured. You have my def tank. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not leaking. My def cap is properly mounted and secured, and it's not leaking. You have my steps. They're properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked or broken, and there's no illegal or hazardous material on my steps, such as grease, oil, or ice. Okay, so you're moving along. You got your gas, your fuel tank. It's properly mounted and secured with my straps and my liners. Okay, there's no loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. I have my fuel cap. It's properly mounted and secured, and it's not leaking. Inside my cap, I have my safety chain and my rubber gasket. Okay, just kind of look at the overall appearance at the side of your tractor. There's no rips or tears, nothing hanging from the side of your truck. Okay, right here, before you step in, you got your header board and the side of your trailer. Okay, there's no loose or missing rivets on either one. There's no cuts, tears, or holes, and there's nothing hanging down. Down the side of my trailer, I have 50% DOT tape all the way down the side. Okay, and there we're going to move in. You have your air lines. Okay, you have your primary and your emergency line. Okay, they are properly mounted and secured at both ends. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and they're not leaking. I have my glad hands. They're properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts. They're not cracked or broken, and they're not leaking. And my seals on the inside of my glad hands, the rubber seals, are not cut, torn, or frayed. Okay? I have my electrical line. It's properly mounted and secured at both ends. There's no cut, tears, or frays. There's no exposed wires, and both plugs are in the lock position. I have my frame rail. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. There's no loose or missing bolts, and there's no illegal welds or drill holes in my frame. My drive axle, it's properly mounted and secured at both ends with U-bolts. It's not cracked or broken. Okay. My exhaust, it's properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. Indication of leakage would be black soot or oil. Okay. Now right back here, because it's off by itself, is your torque bar. It's properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts, and it's not cracked or damaged. Okay. When you come back here, do your air lines and brakes again. I have my air line and my ABS line. They're properly mounted and secured at both ends. My air line, there's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and it's not leaking. My ABS line, it's not cut, torn, or frayed, and there's no exposed wires. Follow that down into your brake chamber. The brake chamber is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken with no loose or missing bolts, and it's not leaking. These brakes back here are S-cam brakes because they have a slack adjuster and a push rod behind your brake chamber. My slack adjuster and my push rod are properly mounted and secured with bolts and cotter pin, and they are not cracked or broken. To check the play in my push rod with my wheels chalked and my brakes released, there should not be more than 1 inch of play when you move that push rod in and out of that brake chamber. Okay. From there, come right over, and you have your spring mount. My spring mount is properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked or broken. I have my spring leaf. There's only one back here, so it's properly mounted and secured at both ends. There's no loose or missing bolts, and it's not cracked or damaged. Follow that straight back, just like in the front. You have your U-bolt and your saddle. It's properly mounted. They are properly mounted and secured. Not cracked or broken. No loose or missing bolts. Looseness will be indicated by shiny metal or rust trails. Follow that straight back. You have your shock absorber. My shock absorber is properly mounted at both ends. Okay, it's not cracked or broken with no loose or missing bolts, and it's not leaking. Right behind your shock absorber, right back there, is your airbag. It's properly mounted and secured at both ends. There's no loose or missing bolts. The airbag itself has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and it's not leaking. Alright, follow it straight in. You got brake drums, because these are S-cam. Brake drums and pads. My brake drums and pads are properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts. They're not cracked or broken. There's no debris between my drum and my pads, such as grease or oil, and my pad itself can have no less than 1/4 inch in thickness. Okay, right here, come to your bud space. My bud space is approximately 3 inches. There can be no debris between my two tandems or my bud space. And you got your tires. Start on the outside. You got your ABCs. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. It's got air in it, so it's not leaking, and it's filled to the manufactured specs. Tread depth can be no less than 2/32 depth on your drive tires. All right, my tires are properly mounted to my wheels. My wheels are not cracked or broken, and there's no illegal welds. And I have my lug nuts. They're all present. They're properly mounted and secured. Looseness will be indicated by shiny metal or rust trails. And I have my hub seal. It's properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts, not cracked or damaged, and it's not leaking. My valve stem is properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts, not cracked or broken. It's not leaking, and my cap is in place. Okay. I would do this axle the same as I did this axle. Okay. So from here, I go right into my coupling system. You start at the top and go to the bottom. At the very top, this big plate right here is your apron. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. No broken welds and no loose or missing bolts. This is your fifth wheel skid plate. Okay? It's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. There's no loose or missing bolts. There can be no gap between my apron and my skid plate, and my skid plate is properly greased. This is my fifth wheel release handle. Okay? It's properly mounted in the lock position. It's not cracked or broken. All right? My fifth wheel sliding fifth wheel is right here. Okay? It's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. No loose or missing bolts. Okay? My mounting bolts. Alright? They're properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. Okay? My sliding fifth wheel pins, locking pins are right here. They are not cracked or broken, and they are in the lock position. My mounting platform, it's not cracked or broken. It's properly mounted and secured with no loose or missing bolts. Okay? So once you get that part, we're going to come back underneath. We're going to finish up your coupling. Okay? Connected to your apron, all the way in the back is your kingpin. Alright, my kingpin is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. At the bottom of my kingpin, I have a flare. It is properly mounted and secured, and it's not cracked or broken. Right here, coming across in the neck of your skid plate, is your locking jaw. It's in the lock position. It's not cracked or broken. Alright, follow that down. You have your reverse lights. They're properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken. It's white in color, and it only acts as my reverse light. And you have your tail lights. Okay, you gotta call them tail lights, guys. They're properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken. They're red in color. They're working properly, and they also act as my brake lights, my four-ways, and my turn signals. And my mud flap. Mud flap is properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts, and it's not cracked or damaged. My mud flap itself has 100% DOT tape on it. The mud flap is not cracked or damaged and has to be no less than 8 inches off the ground, or no more than 8 inches off the ground. Okay. Oh shit, sorry. All right, landing gear. My landing gear is properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts or broken welds. It's not cracked or broken. My landing gear feet are both to the same raised position on both sides. And I have my landing gear handle, my crank. It's properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken, no loose or missing bolts, and it's stowed away in the correct position. All right, come on down. There's your frame and your cross members. Cross members going back and forth all the way up and down your trailer. They are properly mounted and secured, no loose or missing bolts. They're not cracked, broken, or damaged. Okay. One thing I forgot, and I'm sorry. Your clearance light, right up there in the top corner, okay? It's not cracked or broken. It's properly mounted and secured. It's amber in color. It's working properly, and it acts just as my clearance light. Sorry about that. I have another clearance light. Okay, it's properly mounted and secured. Amber in color. It's not cracked or broken. Properly mounted and secured, and it acts as my four-way and my turn signal. Okay, it does have wires that you can see. So you talk about the wires, you're not cut, going afraid, no exposed wires. Coming on down, just the brake line and ABS line. They are properly mounted and secured at both ends. My air line, there's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and it's not leaking. My ABS line is not cut, torn, or frayed, and there's no exposed wires. Follow that down, it goes into your brake chamber. My brake chamber is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, broken, or damaged with no loose or missing bolts, and it's not leaking. These are S-cam brakes back here as well, which means there's a push rod and a slack adjuster behind my brake chamber. They are properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts or pins. To check my slack adjusters, with the wheels taut and the brakes released, there's no more than 1 inch of play in that slack adjuster. Alright? You have your airbags. Airbag itself mount is properly mounted and secured at both ends. It's not cracked or broken with no loose or missing bolts. The airbag itself has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and it's not leaking. Okay, right back there you have your big port bar. Okay, it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken with no loose or missing bolts. Now my shock absorber, it's properly mounted and secured at both ends. No loose or missing bolts, not cracked or damaged, and it's not leaking. Okay. There's no spring mount or leash on the trailer tires, guys. So from there you go into your brakes. They got a brake drum, just like on your drive tires, and a pad. They are properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts. They're not cracked or damaged. There can be no debris between my pad and my drum, such as grease or oil, and my pad itself can have no less than 1/4 inch of thickness. All right, come back out and do your bud space. Bud space is approximately 3 inches, and you just make sure there's no foreign debris between your two tires. When you come out, outside of your tire, your ABC. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. It's got air in it, so you say it's filled, not leaking, and filled to the manufacturer's specs. And tread depth on the trailer tires, just like your drives, is 2/32. Okay? My tires are properly mounted to my wheels. My wheels are not cracked or damaged, and there's no illegal welds. My lug nuts, they're all 10 or present. They're properly mounted and secured. Looseness will be indicated by shiny metal or rust trails. Have my hub seal, it's properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts, not cracked or damaged, and it's not leaking. My valve stem is properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts, not cracked or damaged. Valve stem's in place and it's not leaking. Okay, I checked this axle the same as I checked this axle. Okay, you coming, and you have your mud flap. Mud flap is properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked or damaged, and can be no more than 8 inches off the ground. This mud flap does not require DOT tape. Okay. Coming on down, you have your door catch. It's not cracked or broken. Your ABS light, amber in color, properly mounted and secured, and it's working properly. It only acts as my ABS light. Wires that you can see, so the wires are not cut, torn, or frayed, or exposed wires. And you have another clearance light. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. It's red in color. It's working properly, and there's no exposed wires. Okay, that is just a clearance light. Come around to the back of your truck, start at the top, and you have another set of clearance lights. Okay, they're properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken, and they're red in color, and they're functioning properly. Right next to those are your door handles. All of this is your door handle. Okay, it's properly mounted and secured, no loose or missing bolts, not cracked or broken. Right here you have your door chain, door tie. It's properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken, and no loose or missing bolts. You have your door hinges. They're properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing bolts. They're not cracked or broken. And now doors. They're properly mounted and secured. And they're not cracked or broken. Okay? DOT tape has to be 100% across the back of your truck on your doors. Okay? Then you have your tail lights. Alright? They're properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or damaged. They're red in color and they're properly working. They also act as my brake lights, my four-ways, and my turn signal. Okay? Right here, you have your DOT bumper. Okay? It's properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts or broken welds. It's not cracked or broken. And it has 100% DOT tape across the bottom. Okay? You're going to come over and just say, I'll check this side of my trailer the same as I check that side. And that's it.
You missed
What?
your tandem slide.
Damn, I did.
Oh yeah, and the
My bad.
pin and shit.
Alright, the tandem slide, guys. Sorry about that. My tandem slide is properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked or broken. My tandem pins, locking pins, are in place. There's one there and one here. And my release handle is properly mounted and secured. It's in the locked position and it's not cracked or damaged. Okay? Sorry about that.
Yeah, I'll get your email.
Okay.
No, email it to you because it's gonna be a big video.
Okay.
It's 11:81. It's gonna take a minute. Clear. start your pre-trip. First thing you want to do is your seat belt before you do anything. Here's my seat belt. It's properly mounted and secured at 3 points. Here, on my door frame, and at the floor. Okay? My belt itself is not cut, torn, or frayed. Cuts meaning into the belt. Okay? Put it in, take it out, it locks and works properly. Then you can do your safe start. This is your safe start. Turn your key to the on position. Watch your gauges cycle. My ABS light came on and went off. My gauges cycle. And then once they settle, crank your engine. When you crank your engine, keep your hand over the key and watch your oil gauge. Count to 5 and make sure that oil gauge moves. If it doesn't move, turn your truck off. Okay, it's moving, so that's your safe start. Then you can start your end cap. It should follow along exactly with that page on your pre-trip test. Okay, I have my mirrors. They are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken, and there's no illegal stickers blocking my view. I have my door window. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. There's no illegal stickers blocking my view, and it's not leaking. I have my windshield. It's properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken. There's no illegal stickers blocking my view, and it's not leaking. I have my windshield wipers and my blades. They are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken. My blade itself is not cut, torn, or dry rotted. Okay? As soon as you do that, you come over and then you do show the operation right here on the stick on the left. Push it in. They are working properly, and I have fluid. Okay? Stay on this stick. Check your blinker. My left blinker, my right blinkers are working properly. Pull the stick back towards you for the high beam. You see the high beam light come on, and it's working properly. All right? And you come over, and you're going to check your battery with this little plus symbol. You're just going to press it until you see the picture of the battery come up here on your display. All right? My current reading is 14.2. My normal range is between 12 and 14 volts. Okay? From there, right over to your city horn. It's working, and my air horn. They are both working properly. From there, you come straight down to your water gauge. All right? Normal operating temperature for my oil is 170 to 210. Okay? Come right over to your fuel gauge and your depth gauge. They are working properly. My oil gauge, normal operating PSI for my oil is between 20 and 45 PSI. Then you have your primary and your secondary air. The normal operating range for both is 100 to 125. Straight down from there is your 4-way flashers. Press them, make sure they're working, and just say they're working properly. And you move straight over to your defrost. All the way high, all the way hot, all the way to the man in the mirror. Right there. Because you got to check up here for airflow, and you got to check at the floor for airflow. You got to put your hands down there and feel for it. Okay? DOT doesn't care if you have air conditioning, but you got to have heat at your windshield and at your feet. Alright, from there we move over to safety. So right here in my glove box, I'll have spare fuses and bulbs. Behind my passenger seat, I have my 3 reflective triangles. They're red or orange in color, they're not cracked or broken, and they are properly mounted and secured in the box. Right behind my driver's seat, I have my 10 BC fire extinguisher with the pin in place. It is properly mounted and secured to the floor. It is properly filled and charged with a current inspection sticker in place. You gotta say all that, guys. Now, you're gonna be pointing at this fire extinguisher when you're talking about it. So get in the habit of bringing this hand straight up and releasing your brakes. So you can start your brake test. Release those brakes. Make sure it sets into your chalk, and then turn your truck off and turn it back to the on position. Then you're going to start your brake test. My gauges cycled, my ABS light went on and went off. Once your gauges settle, you can start your brake test. Okay, my first test is my apply test. I'm going to apply steady pressure to my brake for 1 minute. I should not lose more than 4 pounds of pressure after initial loss. That's all you have to say, but you have to say it. Then press your brake and hold it. Your gauge is going to move a little bit. Once it stops, you count to 60 or time it on your phone or your watch. Okay? We won't go to 60 here, but once you get to 60, you release it. It's working properly. My second test is my low warning and buzzer test. I'm going to fan my brakes until my low warning and buzzer sounds, and that should happen by 60 psi. Then you start fanning your brakes all the way to the floor, all the way out. My alarm went off before 60, so it's working properly. My next test is my emergency test. I will continue to fan my brakes until both valves pop out. That should happen between 20 and 45 psi. That's all you say, and then you fan your brakes. This will take a little longer because it's got longer to travel. And both of my valves popped out. Now this truck, the red valve sticks. Resist, if this is the truck you test in, resist, reach it over and pull it on it. Tell him my valve is sticking and he'll tell you, because you don't want to interfere with the test. Okay, so as soon as the valves pop, crank your engine. You don't have to say anything. Crank your engine and you're going to build your pressure back up. I like to build the pressure back up at least until my alarm goes off, so I can make sure it's working. Revving your engine and building up pressure. Try not to get your RPMs over 1500. Actually try to keep them about 12. You can edit that part out where I went over 15. So your primary will normally fill first. Once it gets to 100, or just a tad past it, your secondary will start filling up. It's got to equalize pressure. Your primary will stop filling, and then your secondary, see it's moving. Once they both get to 100, then they'll work in unison the rest of the time. Okay, my alarm went off. So, seatbelt on. You're going to push your chalk away from your wheel. You're going to turn your wheel all the way to the left. All the way to the right, 4 turns. Just remember, when your wheel's turned all the way, one way or the other, 2 turns, 1, 2, back, will put your wheel straight. They don't always keep looking out the window. Chalk, get back in the truck, always be sure to put your seatbelt back on. And then just start the second part of your brake test. Alright? First part of your brake test, your truck has to be off. Or the engine has to be off, the truck on. Second part of your brake test, your engine has to be running. My next test is my tug test. Okay, guys? It doesn't matter which brake you test first, you just have to call it. Okay? I'm going to do my tug test, I'm going to test my trailer brake. So I'm going to release my parking brake and I'm going to pull against my trailer brake. Put it in drive, 2 hands on my wheel, and just give it a tug. Okay, there we go. It's working properly. Okay, now I'm going to test my parking brake. So I'm going to release my trailer brake and I'm going to tug against my parking brake. What is in is released is go. So try to remember it that way. It's in is go. Out is stop. testing my parking brake. I'm going to tug on it. There we go. Now I'm going to do my service brake test. Service brake is testing all the brakes at the same time. I'm going to pull forward approximately 15-20 feet at no more than 5 miles per hour. Both hands on my wheel. I'm going to bring the truck to a controlled stop and release my hands from my steering wheel to make sure my truck doesn't move left or right. Okay? So both your brakes are released. Good drive. Set the mirrors and pull forward. Okay? Need to get up a little bit of speed, just not over 5. Make sure you go the distance. Release it and release your steering wheel. My truck did not move left or right. My brakes are adjusted properly. And that's it. Back her back up, please. Any questions?
Yeah, I got a question.
Of course.
If it does pull to left or right, you gotta report it to the company? Or
Right.
whoever you're
If
working
it
for?
moves left or right, what would cause that?
Either
Defective brake.
the brakes or the rotor or something.
Shifted cargo, lower tire pressure, or suspension problem.
Suspension problem.
Okay.
Okay.
So, but yeah, if it does that, you need to get with dispatch or however your company does it. Get with your mechanic or whatever. Say I did my brake test and my truck pulled to the right pretty bad. Alright. Well, sometimes it's gonna pull maybe a little bit. You'll see your steering wheel. Now if your truck itself pulls, that's different. But if you hit your brake and your steering wheel just kind of turns a little bit, I mean, look at all the ruts.
Yeah.
Okay. So that could account for that. But if your truck itself,
Yeah, that's what I
that's
said.
a
If
big
you
difference.
slam it and then the truck just pulls that way,
Then you got a problem.
then
You don't want that on the road.
Yeah.
If you hit your brakes and your truck takes off to the right, don't drive.
Okay.
Alright? But just remember, guys, on your brakes, on that tug test, it doesn't matter which one you do first, but you have to tell him which one you're testing. So right now, my parking brake is released because it's in. My trailer brake is out. So it's stopped. That means my drives and my trailer brakes, the pads are against the drum. Okay? So they're locked. That's what I'll test first. And just make sure once you do that, when you pull this out, just say, I'm going to test my parking brake. That's all you got to say, but you got to say which one you're testing on. All right? Any other questions?